The grand ballroom of the Blake estate was a shimmering sea of calculated elegance and whispered judgments. Above the massive crystal chandeliers, which Sophia had meticulously selected during the mansion's renovation last spring, cast a fractured, brilliant light over a crowd that valued price tags over people. This night was supposed to be a sanctuary, a celebration of 5 years of a marriage built on a foundation of quiet strength and unwavering loyalty. Instead, it was becoming a crucible. Sophia stood at the top of the mahogany staircase, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. It wasn't the fear of the crowd that moved her, but a profound sense of anticipation. She remembered being a young girl with nothing but dreams, imagining a moment where she could stand beside a man who truly saw her. Richard had been that man, the billionaire, who looked past the surface and fell in love with her essence. Tonight, she wore a simple red dress, elegant in its lack of ornamentation. She didn't need the weight of diamonds to feel her own worth, yet she knew that in this room of vultures, her simplicity would be mistaken for weakness, as her sensible heels made their first soft clicks against the Italian marble of the foyer. The atmosphere shifted. The aristocratic voices, usually filled with refined greetings and laughter that sounded like breaking glass, began to dip into low, venomous murmurs. Sophia kept her gaze level, her auburn hair swept up in a modest style that showcased her face rather than her accessories. She was the mistress of this house, the architect of this evening's joy. But to the women below, in their six-figure gowns, she was an intruder. Who on earth let the domestic staff mingle with the invited guests? A voice drawled, sharp enough to cut through the orchestral music. Sophia didn't flinch. She recognized the speaker, Vivian Wellington, the wife of a prominent property developer whose ego was as inflated as his portfolio. Beside her stood Elaine, a woman whose face was a testament to the finest plastic surgeon's money could buy. They were draped in fabrics that cost more than a mid-sized sedan, their eyes raking over Sophia with a clinical, predatory disdain. Sophia reached for a flute of champagne from a passing tray. The waiter, a young man who had worked for the Blakes for 3 years, gave her a nearly imperceptible nod of deep respect. He knew exactly who she was. The guests, however, saw only a woman in a dress that lacked a visible logo. "Excuse me?" dear Vivian said, her voice dripping with a saccharine, false sweetness. She stepped into Sophia's path, blocking her way into the heart of the ballroom. "I believe there's been a bit of a decorative mishap. The catering entrance is through the kitchen, near the service bins. Though I must say, that shade of red is certainly brave for someone in your position." Sophia took a measured sip of her champagne, the bubbles crisp against her tongue. "I am a guest, actually," she replied, her voice calm and steady. Elaine let out a sharp, jagged laugh that drew the attention of the nearby circle. "Oh, honey, don't be absurd. This is Richard Blake's 5th anniversary gala. The guest list is vetted by the highest security firms in the city. I'm sure whoever you're assisting tonight told you it was okay to step out here, but perhaps you should return to your station before Mr. Blake himself sees you." The circle of onlookers widened. Sophia could feel the heat of their collective judgment. She reached down and discreetly twisted her wedding band, a habit that always grounded her when the world felt tilted. "There is no misunderstanding," she said softly. "I was invited." "By whom?" "The gardener." Vivian snickered, tapping Elaine's arm. A few men nearby cleared their throats, looking uncomfortable but refusing to intervene. The social hierarchy of the room was being enforced, and Sophia was the target of their sport. Vivian leaned in closer, her expensive perfume cloying and heavy. "Tell us, what exactly is it that you do?" "Besides occupying space in a room where you clearly don't belong, I work in corporate restructuring," Sophia answered, meeting Vivian's gaze with a directness that made the older woman blink. "Oh, so you're a secretary?" Elaine asked with feigned interest, her lips curling into a smirk. "Executive level," Sophia clarified. Vivian's smile turned lethal. "I'm sure you're very executive in certain boardrooms. Tell me, do you own a single thing that didn't come from a clearance rack? Because Richard's wife, whom you obviously haven't had the misfortune of meeting, has exquisite taste. This single evening costs more than you will likely earn in a decade. It's an insult to her for you to be standing here." Sophia opened her mouth to speak, but Elaine interrupted, her eyes lighting up with a cruel new thought. Wait, Vivian, look at her. Maybe she's Richard's little secret. A mistress would explain the red dress and the delusions of grandeur. The suggestion hung in the air like a foul mist. For a moment, the only sound was the distant swell of the violin. Then Vivian raised her glass high, her voice projecting across the hush. A toast. To the evening's most unexpected and amusing entertainment, the ballroom erupted. It wasn't just laughter. It was a release of collective cruelty. Faces blurred into a mask of mockery. Sophia felt the humiliation burn, not because she believed their words, but because this night, her anniversary was being dragged through the mud by the very people she had invited into her home. She thought of the months of planning, the floral arrangements she'd supervised, and the personal touches meant to honor 5 years of love. It was all being reduced to a joke then. The sound of a glass shattering against the marble floor silenced the room. The laughter died instantly, replaced by a vacuum of sound. Standing at the grand entrance was Richard Blake. His presence was a physical weight. His tuxedo tailored to a perfection that commanded the room's total submission. His face, usually warm and full of life when he looked at Sophia, was now a mask of glacial, terrifying fury. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply watched. The crowd parted like the Red Sea as Richard began to walk forward. His footsteps were slow, deliberate, and echoed with the finality of a gavel. Vivian, misreading the coldness in his eyes for shared annoyance, straightened her pearls and stepped toward him. Mr. Blake. "Oh, thank goodness you're here!" she exclaimed, her voice fluttering. "We were just dealing with a bit of a security breach. This woman seems to think she's a guest. We were just about to have her escorted out so she doesn't ruin your lovely evening." Richard didn't even look at Vivian. His eyes remained locked on Sophia, on her flushed cheeks, and the way her fingers were tightly intertwined. He looked at the broken glass on the floor, then back at the crowd. "Leave it," Richard said. The 2 words were low, but they vibrated with a command that made the nearby waiter freeze in place. Vivian's smile faltered. "Richard, really? She doesn't belong here. This is an elite event." "We assumed she was." "You assumed?" Richard interrupted, his voice slicing through the air like a razor. He took a step closer to Sophia, his shadow falling over Vivian and Elaine. "And what exactly did you assume about this woman?" Elaine let out a nervous, high-pitched giggle. "Well, look at her, Richard. You're acting like she's someone important. She's just a girl in a red dress." A heavy, suffocating silence followed. Richard didn't blink. He exhaled a slow, deliberate breath, as if he were absorbing the sheer audacity of the ignorance before him. His lips curved into a smile. But it was a smile devoid of any warmth. It was a warning. "Then let me enlighten you," Richard said, his voice now a whisper that carried the force of a thunderclap. He reached out and took Sophia's hand, pulling her gently to his side. He raised his voice so it reached every corner of the silent ballroom. "This woman is my wife. This woman is the mistress of this house. And this woman is the reason any of you were allowed through those gates tonight." The shock was physical. Vivian stumbled back, her mouth hanging open as she searched for words that wouldn't come. Elaine gripped her chest, her face turning a ghostly shade of gray. A frantic murmur began to ripple through the guest names were whispered. Apologies were prepared in hushed tones. And the disdain that had been directed at Sophia was instantly replaced by a visceral, crushing fear. Richard didn't give them a chance to recover. He raised his hand, a simple gesture that commanded the room's total attention. "Kill the music," he ordered. "Cut the lights." The command was executed instantly. The ballroom was plunged into darkness, save for the dim, cold glow of the perimeter chandeliers. The silence was deafening. Richard strode to the head table, picking up a vintage bottle of champagne worth $10,000. Without a second thought, he tilted the bottle, letting the golden liquid pour out onto the marble floor. The sound of the splashing wine echoed like a death knell. He turned his piercing gaze back to Vivian and Elaine. "This," he said, pointing to the puddle on the floor, "is the worth of your words in this house. Nothing. You have insulted the woman I love and the home we built together." He turned to his security team, who had already moved into position. "Make them disappear," he said coldly. "I want them off my property." Now, there were no protests. Vivian and Elaine were surrounded and escorted out before they could even gather their wraps. They knew, as did everyone else in the room, their social standing had just been obliterated. Richard then turned his attention to the rest of the guests. His eyes swept over the men in their expensive suits and the women clutching their diamonds. "I watched you," he said, his voice thick with contempt. "Some of you laughed. The rest of you stood by and watched a woman be humiliated because you thought she was lesser than you. I don't need leeches in my home. I don't need cowards at my table." With a sharp flick of his wrist, he gave the final command. "All of you, out." The evacuation was swift and silent. There were no goodbyes, no lingering sips of wine. The elite of the city were removed like common trespassers, their dignity stripped away by the very man they had spent years trying to impress. The sound of hurried footsteps and the slamming of heavy doors eventually faded, leaving the mansion in a state of profound, peaceful stillness. Richard and Sophia stood alone in the center of the vast, darkened ballroom. The anger in Richard's eyes vanished the moment he looked at her, replaced by a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. He reached out, cupping her face in his hands. "Are you okay?" he whispered. Sophia leaned into his touch, a small, genuine smile finally touching her lips. "I've never been better," she replied. Richard took her hand and led her across the empty floor to an antique mahogany cabinet. He opened it with reverent hands, revealing a vintage record player they had found together in a small shop years ago. He selected a vinyl record and carefully set the needle. The warm, crackling intro of Ella Fitzgerald's at last began to fill the empty hall. He extended his hand, and Sophia stepped into his embrace. They began to sway, their movements fluid and familiar. "The Palomar Ballroom, 1959, she whispered against his shoulder. Referencing a story they loved, "You wore a baby blue dress with white flowers on the hem," Richard murmured back, his voice a gentle rumble. "And I couldn't dance to save my life." "You've improved considerably," Sophia laughed, leaning her head against his chest as he twirled her expertly beneath the glow of the crystals. As the music transitioned into Glenn Miller's Moonlight Serenade, it let the memories of their journey wash over them, the cross-country road trip in a beat-up Cadillac. The small-town diners, where they were just two people in love. And the woman named Ruby in Albuquerque gave them free pie because she saw the spark between them. "You always remember the names," Richard said softly. Kissing the top of her head, "And you always remember the stories," she replied. The night didn't end in the empty ballroom. 3 weeks later, after the scandal had settled and the social landscape had been permanently altered, Richard presented Sophia with an elegant blue envelope. Inside was a private invitation to the Metropolitan Opera House. "A private evening," Richard explained as she read the card. "Just us. The performance you've always wanted to see. La Boheme with a private orchestra and the soprano you've admired since we were newlyweds. It was supposed to be our anniversary surprise, but I think you deserve a night that is truly perfect." On the night of the opera, Sophia stood in a new red gown, one of exquisite craftsmanship, in the center of the illuminated, empty theater. On her seat, she found 2 small envelopes. One was from Vivian, a handwritten note expressing a sincere, bitter regret. It stated that Sophia's dignity had shown Vivian's own life to be hollow. The second was from Elaine, confirming a massive, permanent donation to the charity foundation Sophia managed, not for forgiveness, she wrote, but because it was the right thing to do. As the final, haunting notes of the opera echoed through the magnificent hall, Richard reached over and gently wiped a stray tear from Sophia's cheek. "Was it everything you dreamed?" he asked. Sophia looked at the man who had stood by her through every hardship and every triumph. She looked at the empty theater, realized that she didn't need the applause of 1,000 strangers to know who she was. "It's more," she said, "so much more." As they walked out into the cool night air under a canopy of stars, Sophia realized a truth that would stay with her forever. True power wasn't found in the ability to diminish others or in the accumulation of wealth. It was found in the courage to stand tall in one's own skin. and in the strength of a love that shielded you from the storms of the world." She smiled, holding Richard's hand tightly, knowing that while the world might judge the surface, the heart always knows the truth.